The Valorian research station hung in the darkness of space like a gleaming pearl, orbiting a resource-rich asteroid that had drawn the attention of every major civilization in the galaxy. Inside the main laboratory, thousands of lights blinked in perfect rhythm, and machines hummed with the quiet precision of devices that had been fine-tuned to work without error. This was where the impossible became real, where the Valorian collective had spent the last 7 years creating something that many thought could never exist. Ambassador Q-Ho stood at the wide observation window, watching the asteroid slowly spin below. She was human, and humans were still new to the greater galaxy. Most advanced civilizations had been exploring the stars for thousands of years, while humanity had only begun their journey into space a few decades ago. Yet here she was, chosen to witness something that the Valorians had never invited any outsider to see before. The Valorians themselves were a sight to behold. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, with smooth skin that seemed to catch and reflect light in strange ways, and eyes that held intelligence built from centuries of careful study and perfect logic. They moved with purpose and grace, never wasting a single motion. Everything about them spoke of a civilization that had mastered precision in every way imaginable. Dr. Taewoo stood at the center of the laboratory, his Valorian frame draped in the ceremonial robes of his position as chief engineer of the collective. His eyes glowed with a soft blue light as he gestured to the object before them. It floated in a special chamber, held in place by forces that Q-Ho's human mind could barely understand. The object itself was beautiful in a way that made Q-Ho catch her breath. It was called the Omni-Cutter, and it was the reason Q-Ho had been invited here today. The device was roughly the size of a human hand, though shaped in ways that were not meant for human fingers. Its surface was covered in patterns and lines that seemed to shift and change when you looked at them directly. Materials that Q-Ho could not name gleamed and shimmered across its form. Some parts were metal, some were crystal, some seemed to be made of pure light, somehow captured and held in place. It was a masterpiece, and Q-Ho understood immediately why the Valorians were so proud. Dr. Taewoo's voice was calm and measured as he began to explain the tool to the assembled group. There were other humans present, scientists and military observers, but it was clear that Dr. Taewoo was speaking mainly to Q-Ho. She was the face of humanity in the collective's eyes, their chosen representative. For 7 years, Dr. Taewoo said, our finest minds have worked on this creation. Every microsecond of its operation has been studied and optimized. Every material has been chosen not just for what it does, but for how it does it. The Omni-Cutter is more than just a tool. It is a statement about what is possible when perfection is the only acceptable goal. He raised his long fingers, and the chamber containing the tool shifted. The Omni-Cutter rotated slowly, allowing everyone to see every detail from every angle. This tool can cut through any known substance, Dr. Taewoo continued. It adapts to the molecular structure of whatever material it encounters. Its blade is made from a substance we created specifically for this purpose, a material that exists nowhere else in the galaxy. The handle is designed to fit any species that has hands capable of grasping it. And when the tool becomes damaged, it can repair itself using microscopic internal systems. Q-Ho felt a sense of wonder wash over her. This was the kind of achievement that humanity might someday reach, but it would take centuries. The Valorians had done it in 7 years because they approached problems with a level of patience and precision that humans rarely possessed. A younger Valorian scientist named Dr. Hae-il stood near Q-Ho, observing her reaction carefully. Your people build things quickly, Dr. Hae-il said, speaking in the simplified version of the Valorian language that Q-Ho had learned. But we prefer to build things correctly. Q-Ho nodded respectfully, understanding the point being made. Humans did rush, They built things that were good enough for their needs and moved on to the next problem. The Valorians, with their long lifespans and endless patience, could afford to spend years perfecting a single tool. It was a different philosophy, and Kyuho could see the wisdom in it. "Why did it take so long?" Kyuho asked, directing her question to Dr. Taewoo. "With all your knowledge and resources, surely it could have been completed faster." Dr. Taewoo's expression did not change, but something in his gaze seemed to shift. He looked at Kyuho with the kind of intensity that suggested she had asked either a very foolish question or a very important one. "Perfection cannot be rushed," he said simply. "Every moment spent on this tool was necessary. Every delay meant another flaw was discovered and corrected. To rush would have been to accept imperfection, and that is simply not acceptable to the Valorian collective. We have reached our level of advancement by refusing to compromise on quality. That is how we do things." The ceremony continued for another hour. Dr. Taewoo demonstrated the Omni Cutter's basic functions, showing how it adapted its cutting surface to different materials. The assembled crowd watched in silence, genuinely impressed by what they were seeing. This was technology at its finest, the product of a civilization that had dedicated itself entirely to the pursuit of excellence. As the ceremony concluded, Kyuho was invited to hold the tool for just a moment. The weight of it in her hand was surprisingly light, and the handle seemed to adjust itself to fit her human grip perfectly. For a brief instant, Kyuho imagined what humanity might accomplish if they had 7 years to perfect a single tool. They might create something functional. The Valorians had created something beautiful. Dr. Taewoo watched as Kyuho handed the tool back to its chamber. "This will be given to your exploration team," he said. "You will take it with you on your mission to explore the caves of Keras Prime. If anything can cut through the unknown materials you find there, it will be the Omni Cutter. You will have the greatest tool ever created at your side." Kyuho thanked him sincerely, and she meant it. What could possibly go wrong with such a perfect creation backing her team up? She would find out the answer to that question far sooner than she expected. The caves of Keras Prime were older than most civilizations. They stretched deep beneath the planet's surface, and their walls held secrets that scientists had been trying to understand for decades. The crystal formations that grew inside these caves were unlike anything found anywhere else in the galaxy. They caught and reflected light in ways that made the darkness seem alive, and their molecular structure was so strange that even advanced scanners had trouble making sense of them. Kyuho led her team deeper into the largest cave system. Besides herself, there was Minsuk, a skilled engineer from Korea with quick hands and an even quicker mind. There was also a Valorian specialist named Dr. Hai-Il, who had been assigned to the mission to ensure that their equipment functioned properly and that all data was recorded with the precision the Valorian collective demanded. The team had been exploring for 3 days without any real problems, but that was about to change. The path forward was blocked by a massive crystal formation. It rose from the ground like a frozen wave, catching the light from their equipment and throwing it back in 1,000 different directions. The crystals were transparent, yet somehow looked solid, and they seemed to pulse with an energy of their own. The team's scanners showed that the formation was at least 30 meters thick and completely blocked access to the deeper sections of the cave system where the most interesting discoveries were being made. This was exactly the kind of obstacle the Omni Cutter had been designed to handle. Kyuho carefully removed the tool from its protective case. The device felt even better in her hands now than it had during the ceremony. It seemed to know that it was needed. She activated it according to the instructions that Dr. Taewoo had provided, and the blade began to glow with a soft light. This was it. The perfect tool was about to cut through an impossible obstacle, exactly as promised. She placed the blade against the crystal formation and pressed forward. For the first few seconds, everything seemed to be working. The tool hummed quietly, and a thin line began to appear in the crystal as the Omni-Cutter's blade made contact with the strange material. Then something changed. The blade suddenly flared bright red. An alarm sound came from the device, a high-pitched wail that echoed through the caves. Q-Ho jumped back, but it was too late. The Omni-Cutter overheated in her hands, forcing her to drop it onto the cave floor. The tool went dark and silent, and when Q-Ho picked it up carefully, she realized that it had shut down completely. The team stood in shocked silence. The perfect tool had failed. Min-Suk was the first to speak. "Did that just stop working?" he asked, his voice full of disbelief. Q-Ho turned the tool over in her hands. It was still warm, and small wisps of smoke came from its internal components. She tried to reactivate it, but nothing happened. The screen that normally showed information about the tool remained dark. Dr. Hai-Il's eyes glowed with concern. She immediately began scanning the crystal formation with her devices, trying to understand what had happened. After several minutes, she sent a message through her communication device to the research station. Her voice was calm but frustrated as she explained the situation to the other Valorians monitoring the mission. "The molecular structure of this crystal is unlike anything we have encountered before," Dr. Hai-Il reported. "The Omni-Cutter systems were not prepared for it. We need the tool to be repaired before we can proceed." The response came quickly. Dr. Taewoo himself would make the trip to Keras Prime to retrieve the Omni-Cutter and repair it, but that would take at least an hour. The team was effectively stranded. The path forward was blocked, and the path backward would take several hours to climb back through. They would have to wait. Q-Ho sat down on the cave floor, staring at the broken tool in her hands. She felt a mix of emotions: disappointment, frustration, and something else, too. Something that made her angry. They had been promised that the Omni-Cutter could cut through any substance. They had been told that it was perfect, that it had been optimized for every possible situation. Yet here it was, unable to handle a simple crystal formation. Her mission timeline was already tight. Waiting for repairs would push everything back. And if this crystal formation could stop the Omni-Cutter, what else would stop it? How many other unknown materials were waiting deeper in the caves? Min-Suk noticed his team leader's frustration. He was a practical man, the kind who preferred to solve problems rather than complain about them. He began to look around the cave, examining the floor and the scattered rocks that littered their path. His eyes landed on the debris from their journey, broken equipment, materials that had been discarded, things that weren't useful anymore. "You know," Min-Suk said thoughtfully, "we don't have to just sit here waiting." Q-Ho looked up at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we have about an hour before Dr. Taewoo gets here. We have tools and materials all around us. Maybe we can figure something out ourselves," Min-Suk said, a small smile forming on his face. For a moment, Q-Ho wanted to refuse. They were supposed to rely on the perfect Valorian tool. That was the whole point of having it. But then she remembered something that she had always known about herself and about all humans. When perfect tools weren't available, humans learned to make their own. She stood up and began examining the materials around them more carefully. There was a jagged piece of metal plating from their broken drone scanning equipment. There was a piece of equipment cable made from an organic material that was surprisingly strong. And scattered around the crystal barrier were smaller crystal fragments that had broken off over time, some of them with sharp edges that might be useful. Dr. Hai-Il watched this activity with clear confusion. "What are you doing?" she asked. "The solution to our problem is simple. We wait for Dr. Taewoo to repair the tool, and then we continue forward." Q-Ho did not answer immediately. Instead, she picked up the jagged metal piece and turned it over in her hands, examining its edges. The metal was old and worn, but it was still hard. She had an idea forming in her mind, something that was neither perfect nor planned, but that might actually work. "We're not just waiting," Q-Ho said quietly. "We're thinking." She looked at Min-Suk, and he nodded in understanding. The two humans began to work, gathering materials and examining them carefully. Dr. Hai-Il continued to stand and watch, unable to understand why they would waste time on such a clearly pointless activity when help was already on the way. But Q-Ho and Min-Suk understood something that the Valorians did not. Sometimes, when you had limited time and limited resources, you had to be creative. You had to be willing to try things that might not work. You had to be willing to fail because failure was just part of the process of learning. In the next few minutes before Dr. Tae-Woo arrived to save the day, two humans were about to discover that sometimes the worst tool is better than no tool at all. Q-Ho worked quickly, her hands moving with purpose even though she had no clear plan. This was something humans were good at, she thought. Improvisation, making something from nothing, creating solutions on the fly when circumstances demanded it. The Valorians spent years planning every detail. Humans had learned to adapt in minutes. She picked up the jagged metal piece from the drone and examined its edges carefully. The metal was sharp enough to cut, though not nearly as sharp as the Omni Cutter had been. But it had weight to it, and it had an irregular shape that might work in ways the perfect tool never could. Min-Suk had already found something interesting. He held up a piece of crystalline fragment, one of the smaller pieces that had broken off from the main formation. The fragment was naturally sharp with edges that seemed almost designed for cutting. It was not perfect, and it was definitely not reliable, but it was there, and it was available. "What if we bind them together?" Min-Suk suggested, showing Q-Ho his finding. "Metal and crystal, different materials working at the same time." Q-Ho nodded slowly, understanding his thinking. Two different materials with different properties, neither one perfect by itself, but together they might create something that could adapt to the crystal barrier in ways the single perfect material could not. She searched through the scattered equipment and found what she needed. There was a climbing rope made from organic fibers, strong and flexible. She also found a piece of electrical cable with a rubber coating that was surprisingly resilient. Working quickly, Q-Ho began to wrap these materials around the metal piece and the crystal fragment, binding them together in a way that was neither elegant nor precise, but surprisingly functional. The device took shape in her hands. It was crude. There was no other word for it. If Dr. Tae-Woo had seen it, he would have considered it a work of primitive desperation. The binding was uneven. The angles were wrong. The materials seemed almost random in their combination. Everything about it violated the principles of perfect design that the Valorians held so dear. But Q-Ho could feel something in it as she worked. This tool, this terrible, imperfect tool, had a quality that the Omni Cutter did not have: flexibility, adaptability. Because it was not perfectly optimized for anything, it was adaptable to everything. Min-Suk watched his colleague work, occasionally handing her materials or helping to tie the bindings tighter. After about 8 minutes of work, they had created something that looked like it had no business cutting through anything at all. Q-Ho held the improvised tool in her hand and looked at it with mixed feelings. It was nothing like the beautiful Omni Cutter. It was rough. It was unpredictable. It was exactly the kind of tool that a civilization of perfectionists would reject out of hand. Dr. Hai-Il had been watching the entire process with growing confusion. "Why are you creating this?" she asked, finally. "It serves no purpose. The Omni Cutter will be repaired soon, and we will cut through the barrier properly. This thing is a waste of time." Q-Ho did not answer immediately. Instead, she walked to the crystal barrier and studied it carefully. Then she placed the blade of her improvised tool against the crystal surface and began to press forward gently. feeling for resistance rather than forcing her way through. What happened next surprised everyone, including Q-Ho. The crystal began to crack. It was not a clean cut like the Omni cutter would have made. The line that appeared in the crystal was jagged and irregular, but it was working. The metal and crystal combination, bound together with crude rope and cable, was actually cutting through the barrier. Q-Ho pressed harder, and the crack deepened. The irregular edges of her improvised tool found places to bite into the crystal that the perfectly smooth Omni cutter never could have accessed. The imperfection was actually becoming strength. Where perfect design demanded that every part of the blade meet the material at exactly the right angle, this rough tool worked because its imperfections allowed it to work at multiple angles at once. Within 2 minutes, Q-Ho had cut a line through the crystal. She angled the tool and cut again, creating a shape that could be pushed through. The crude cutting took much longer than the perfect tool would have, but it was working. It was actually working. Min-Suk helped her widen the opening, using the rope's edge to scrape away loose crystal material. Within 10 minutes, they had created a gap large enough for the team to squeeze through. Dr. Hae-il stared at the opening in disbelief. Her scanner confirmed what her eyes were seeing. The crystal barrier had been cut. The human-made tool had done what the perfect tool could not do. "This is not possible," Dr. Hae-il said quietly. "The Omni cutter is superior. This tool should not function at all." Q-Ho looked down at her creation. This terrible, imperfect, crude tool that had somehow accomplished what the galaxy's most advanced technology had failed to do. She felt a strange sense of pride, but also confusion. How had this happened? How could something so badly made work so well? The answer, she realized, was simple. She had not tried to make the perfect tool. She had tried to make a tool that worked. And in trying to work with limited resources and limited time, she had created something with a quality that perfection did not have. She had created something adaptable. A sound came from deeper in the cave system. Dr. Tae-woo was arriving with his team to repair the Omni cutter. But now, for the first time in the history of the Valorian Collective's greatest achievement, the perfect tool had been surpassed by something made from trash. And neither Q-Ho nor Dr. Hae-il could fully explain why. The Valorian research station was quiet compared to how it had been during the Omni cutter ceremony. Dr. Tae-woo stood in the main laboratory with Q-Ho, Min-Suk, and several other Valorian scientists. The room was filled with testing equipment, scanners, and observation devices. On one table sat the repaired Omni cutter, its surface gleaming with perfection. On another table sat Q-Ho's improvised tool, with its crude binding and irregular shape. The comparison was striking. The Omni cutter looked like what it was, a masterpiece created by a civilization of advanced beings over 7 years of careful work. Q-Ho's tool looked like what it was, too, something made from trash in 10 minutes. Dr. Tae-woo had insisted on conducting a full comparison analysis. This was the scientific way, the Valorian way. You did not simply accept results. You studied them carefully, tested them thoroughly, and only then did you allow yourself to understand what you were seeing. The first test involved cutting through a simple metal alloy, the kind that spacefaring civilizations used for their ships. The Omni cutter activated smoothly, its blade humming with power. It cut through the metal like a knife through warm butter, leaving a perfectly straight line with edges so clean they seemed almost impossible. Then Q-Ho took her improvised tool and tested it on the same material. The cut was rough and required more pressure, but it worked. The blade cut through, leaving marks and scratches where the perfect tool left a clean line. But both tools accomplished the goal. Both cut through the metal. The observers watched in silence. The second test was more complex. The scientists brought out a sample of the crystal that had blocked the team's path in the cave system. This was the material that had defeated the Omni cutter. Both tools would be tested against it, starting with the repaired Omni-Cutter. Dr. Taewoo activated the perfect tool and placed it carefully against the crystal sample. The Omni-Cutter's blade glowed, and the tool began to work. For several seconds, everything seemed fine. Then the same thing that had happened in the cave began to occur. The blade overheated. The internal system scrambled to adapt to the material's molecular structure. Alarms sounded. Dr. Taewoo removed the Omni-Cutter before it could be damaged again. The tool was still functional, but it had clearly struggled. The crystal sample showed a small mark where the tool had begun to cut. But the cut was shallow and imprecise, nothing like the clean lines the Omni-Cutter had made on other materials. The molecular structure of this crystal is unlike anything in our databases, explained Dr. Hae-il, who had been studying the material since the team's return. The Omni-Cutter was not designed for this specific combination of elements. It cannot adapt fast enough. Now it was Kyu-ho's turn. She took her crude tool and examined the crystal sample carefully. She ran her fingers along the rough edges of her creation, feeling its irregularities. Then she placed it against the crystal and began to cut. The motion was different from how the Omni-Cutter worked. There was no smooth, gliding motion. Instead, Kyu-ho's tool seemed to work by grinding and scraping, finding weak points in the crystal structure and exploiting them. The irregular edges of the metal and crystal binding worked together in ways that no perfectly designed tool could. After only a few minutes, Kyu-ho had cut deeper into the sample than the Omni-Cutter had managed. She continued, and the mark in the crystal grew longer and deeper. The observers began to see that Kyu-ho's tool was not just working. It was working faster than the perfect tool had worked. When she finally stopped, she had cut completely through the crystal sample. There was silence in the laboratory. The younger Valorian scientists, like Dr. Hae-il, began to examine both tools and both cuts with intense focus. Their scanners and equipment worked to record every detail. Questions started to emerge in whispered conversations between the scientists. "How is this possible?" one asked. "The design principles are all wrong," said another. "It should not work at all." Dr. Hae-il was studying Kyu-ho's tool with particular interest. She was young for a Valorian, and younger beings sometimes possessed the ability to question things that older, more established minds accepted without thought. "The imperfection," she said slowly. "It is actually a feature, is it not?" Kyu-ho nodded. "Yes. Because it is not specialized for one thing, it can work for many things. It adapts because it is not perfect. The Omni-Cutter is perfect at cutting materials it was designed for. My tool is adequate at cutting many materials it was never designed for." Dr. Taewoo was silent for a long time. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes seemed to shift as he processed what he was seeing. He was a scientist first. And data did not lie. The results were clear. In this specific test, the improvised tool had outperformed the masterpiece. Finally, Dr. Taewoo asked the question that seemed to drive at the heart of everything. "How did you think of this?" he asked Kyu-ho. "How did you create this tool? Tell me your design process." Kyu-ho thought for a moment, trying to find the right words to explain something that she had done almost without thinking. "We didn't have time for perfection," she said finally. "We had 10 minutes, and we needed something that would work. So I looked at what I had available, and I tried to combine things in ways that might create something useful. I failed several times in my mind before I even started building. But I had to start with something because waiting was not an option. But our design process ensures that we never fail," Dr. Taewoo said. And it was clear that he meant this as a statement of pride, not an excuse. "Yes," Kyu-ho agreed, "but you also ensure that you are slow to adapt when something unexpected happens. You knew how to handle crystals that matched your databases. You did not know how to handle crystals that did not match. I did not know anything, so I had to try different approaches until one worked. Dr. Taewoo turned away and looked at the two tools side by side. One was the result of 7 years of careful planning and optimization. The other was the result of 10 minutes of desperate improvisation, and in this moment, both had shown their strengths and their weaknesses. The Valorian scientist understood that he was standing at a crossroads. He could reject these results as impossible and insist that the Omni-Cutter remained superior, or he could accept what the data was telling him about the value of imperfection, adaptation, and thinking on your feet. It would not be an easy choice for a being who had spent his entire life pursuing perfection. The conference hall of the Valorian Collective was designed to inspire awe. It was vast, with ceilings that stretched so high they seemed to touch the sky itself. The walls were made from polished crystal that caught and reflected light in ways that made the entire space shimmer with intelligence and precision. This was where the most important decisions in Valorian society were made. This was where Dr. Taewoo stood now, preparing to present findings that would challenge everything the Valorian Collective believed about themselves. The council members were gathered, all of them elders who had spent centuries studying and perfecting their craft. They sat in perfect formation, their tall frames arranged in geometric patterns that pleased their sense of order. Human delegates were also present, including Ambassador Kyuho, who sat in a special section reserved for guests of the collective. Dr. Taewoo activated the holographic displays that filled the center of the conference hall. Images of the Omni-Cutter appeared, rotating slowly in 3 dimensions. Then the image of Kyuho's improvised tool appeared beside it. The contrast was striking. The Omni-Cutter gleamed with beauty and precision. The improvised tool looked rough and crude by comparison. "We have conducted thorough testing," Dr. Taewoo began, his voice steady and measured. "The results were unexpected. On materials that the Omni-Cutter was designed for, it performs with superior precision. However, on materials that presented unusual molecular structures, the improvised tool outperformed the Omni-Cutter." A murmur ran through the council. Some of the elder Valorians looked confused, as if they had not heard the words correctly. One council member, an ancient being named Dr. Min Jun, whose time alive stretched back further than most species had existed, leaned forward with interest. "Explain this anomaly," Dr. Min Jun commanded. His voice carried the weight of centuries of authority. Dr. Taewoo continued, his presentation showing detailed data and comparison charts. "I have developed a theory," he said. "Advanced civilizations like ourselves design for perfection. We optimize every aspect of our creations. We spend years ensuring that each tool does exactly what we intend for it to do, with no waste and no excess. This approach has served us well for thousands of years." The council nodded in agreement. This was the foundation of Valorian philosophy. "However," Dr. Taewoo said, and his voice shifted slightly, "younger species design for survival. They have limited time and limited resources. They cannot spend years perfecting a single tool. Instead, they combine available materials in creative ways. Their designs are not optimized for specific tasks. Instead, they are adaptable to unexpected situations." Dr. Hae-il, who had been assigned to stand beside Dr. Taewoo during the presentation, added her own observations. She was young and brilliant, and the council listened carefully to her words. "The imperfection is not a flaw," Dr. Hae-il explained. "It is a feature. By combining multiple materials that were not designed to work together, the improvised tool created something that could respond to different situations in different ways. It is less efficient at any single task, but more versatile across multiple tasks." Another council member, a skeptical elder named Dr. Su-jin, raised her hand. "Are you suggesting that we have become stagnant in our perfection?" Her voice carried an edge of offense. "That the Valorian way is somehow inferior to human improvisation?" "Not inferior," Dr. Taewoo said carefully. different. We have optimized for situations we can predict and understand. The OmniCutter is superior in every way for materials that exist in our databases. But for the unknown, for the unexpected, for situations we could not have predicted, the adaptable tool has advantages. Q-Ho watched the council's reactions. Some seemed genuinely interested in what they were hearing. Others seemed defensive, as if the very idea that their civilization might have a weakness was something they could not accept. She understood this feeling. No one liked to hear that their way of doing things, the way that had made them successful, might not be the best way for every situation. Dr. Min Jun stood up slowly. When an ancient council member of his standing rises to speak, all others must listen. "You are proposing that we examine our methods?" he asked, his tone suggesting that this was nearly unthinkable. "I am proposing," Dr. Taewoo said carefully, "that we consider a collaboration. Humans and Valorians working together. The humans bringing their capacity for improvisation and adaptation. The Valorians bringing our precision and planning. Together, we could create something that neither species could create alone." Dr. Ha-il continued the presentation, showing proposed designs for hybrid tools and technologies. Tools that combined Valorian precision with human adaptability. Technologies that were planned carefully but designed for flexibility rather than optimization. It was a new way of thinking, and it seemed to both excite and threaten the council members. There was debate. Some council members argued passionately that the Valorian way had served them well and should not be abandoned. Dr. Su Jin was particularly vocal in her opposition. "We are being asked to compromise our values because of a single test?" she demanded. "This is foolish." But Dr. Min Jun seemed thoughtful. "I have lived long enough to see civilizations rise by learning from others," he said slowly. "To refuse to learn because we are proud of our current methods is exactly how civilizations stagnate and eventually decline." The vote, when it finally came, was close, but it was decisive. The Valorian Collective would establish a Human-Valorian Innovation Division. Humans and Valorians would work together, combining their strengths to create new technologies. It was a historic moment, and everyone in the conference hall knew it. As the council members filed out, debating among themselves about what this decision meant, Q-Ho felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Dr. Taewoo. His eyes glowed with a complex mixture of emotions. Respect, uncertainty, and something that might have been admiration. "You have changed my people," he said quietly. "I am not certain if this is a good thing yet, but it is certainly a true thing. The data does not lie." Q-Ho smiled at the tall Valorian scientist. "You changed your own people," she said. "You were brave enough to present data that challenged your own work. That is what science requires. Not perfection, but truth." Dr. Taewoo nodded slowly. He looked back at the conference hall where the council had gathered. The Valorian Collective was about to embark on a new path, one that combined perfection with adaptability, planning with improvisation, and ancient wisdom with young creativity. And it had all started because a human had made something from trash that worked better than something that had taken 7 years to perfect. Sometimes the greatest discoveries were not made in laboratories. Sometimes they were made in caves when time was running out and resources were limited and someone had to think of something different.